Hello, thank you for joining us for this session, a deeper dive into zero net carbon schools. The session is being produced with the City of San Jose Environmental Services and the Silicon Valley Energy Watch. I'm Connie Empress, Communications Manager here at New Buildings Institute. Before we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping things to tell you about. First, you are muted and we cannot hear you. This helps keep the background noise down so that everyone can better hear the speakers. I want to direct you to the dashboard that you should be able to see on the right-hand side of your screen. If you are having technical difficulties and cannot see the slides or hear our speakers, you can use this question pane in the dashboard to let us know, and we will help you as we go. We will take a few questions a couple times during the presentation. Please ask questions in the same question pane. Please take a couple minutes to answer the survey that will pop up after the session. If you are seeking AIA credits, this is where you will enter your AIA number. This session is being recorded. All registrants will receive an email tomorrow with links to the recording and slides for the session, and attendees will receive a certificate of participation in that same follow-up email. Kicking off today's session is Riley Loveland, NBI Project Manager. Riley's NBI's Sustainable Schools expert. She leads our school projects, including work around getting educational facilities to zero energy and zero carbon. Over to you, Riley.
Thanks, Connie, and good morning, everyone in the West, and good afternoon to everyone in the East. As Connie said, my name is Riley Loveland, and I'm a project manager here at NBI. Welcome to you all, and thanks for joining. But before I dive into the heart of this presentation, I'm actually going to quickly pass the mic over to Tina Gonterman of Silicon Valley Energy Watch, because this couldn't have been possible without Silicon Valley Energy Watch. And thank you to them for partnering with us and making this webinar happen. So Tina, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Riley. I am with the Silicon Valley Energy Watch, or SVOO, and that's a local government partnership with PG&E. We strive to save energy or reduce energy in a variety of sectors and have been doing this work since 2010. Right now, we're really focused on the public sector, so schools are a big part of that. So we're really happy that you all have joined us. And actually, I'd like to share a resource with you. Next slide. We have a zero net carbon video that we're going to show you in just a moment. And I want to call out this video talks about what ZNC or zero net carbon buildings are and the benefits. And actually, for every organization on this call today, whether it's a school district, or an energy organization, we'd like to share this with you so that you can brand it for your own. In the last frame of the video, you'll notice our Silicon Valley Energy Watch and City of San Jose URL and logo. That information can be replaced with your information. So if you'd like that, please reach out to me and we'll get you my email by mid-July, or I'm sorry, mid-June. Okay, take it away. Let's play the video.
For decades now, there's been an environmental movement raising important questions and inspiring more sustainable solutions. Just compare yesterday's gas guzzlers to today's electric vehicles, or how recycling has almost become second nature. Over the next 10, 20, 30 years, zero net carbon building standards will be a key component in addressing the impacts of climate change we are now facing. You might be wondering, what exactly is a zero net carbon or ZNC building? In a nutshell, ZNC buildings have three characteristics. They are energy efficient, they are fully electric, and they use carbon-free energy sources, such as solar or wind, to meet operational energy needs. This concept applies to all building types: homes, businesses, schools, fire stations, you name it. A ZNC building starts with energy efficiency. One of the simplest ways to improve efficiency in an existing building would be to install LEDs or use natural light and buy ENERGY STAR labeled equipment and appliances. Did you know natural lighting has been proven to improve learning in classrooms and employee productivity? ZNC buildings feature ideal interior climates and less noise pollution due to energy efficient insulation. New technologies like smart thermostats work with these improvements to only use energy when and where it's needed. ZNC buildings must also be fully electric because natural gas, which is mostly methane, produces greenhouse gases and decreases indoor air quality. Efficient electric options such as induction cooktops and heat pumps for heating spaces, cooling spaces, and heating water are already widely available. The third key part of a ZNC building is ensuring the energy used is carbon-free. Harnessing the power of the sun will go a long way to make that happen. The costs to install solar have declined dramatically, simplifying the decision to choose solar energy production. Even better is when on-site solar generation is paired with battery storage and electric vehicle charging stations to add both convenience and reliability. For buildings that are not well suited for solar or can't generate enough energy to meet their needs, ZNC is still achievable by purchasing 100% carbon-free or renewable electricity from your power provider. The strongest ZNC benefit is the improvement in quality of life for you, your family, and the community, with utility cost savings, cleaner air, and more comfortable living spaces. Moving toward a fossil fuel-free future is a bold but necessary goal, and the implementation of ZNC building components is a huge step in the right direction. To learn more about ZNC and steps you can take now toward this future, check out these resources.
So that was our ZNC video. Once again, if you are with an organization that would like to rebrand this video, please reach out to me, Tina Gonterman, by mid-June. It is a free resource, and I will give you access to the blank last frame version. So thanks, Riley. Back to you.
Thank you, Tina. And it did sound like a couple of people were having issues seeing or hearing the video. You know, streaming is a little tough sometimes, but we will have a link to it. And it sounded like other people could see it, so I'm gonna chalk that up as a win. But again, we'll have the link both available to this entire webinar, which will have the video playing in it, and then also a separate one so you can view it on YouTube. So some of you may have tuned in for the first part of this webinar series where we covered the basics of zero net carbon schools. For those of you that missed it and you want that kind of basic start, you can check it out at this link here. And for those of you lucky enough to be tuning into an NBI webinar for the first time, NBI is a national nonprofit who works to reduce energy and carbon emissions in new and existing buildings. We've been working in the schools market honestly for many years and are thrilled to share what we've learned about getting to zero net carbon in schools. For those of you seeking continuing education credit, here are the learning objectives for today for you to refer back to as needed. As Connie said, please enter in your AIA number in the survey after the webinar. And before we dive in, I'll do a super quick recap of the concept of getting to zero in schools. You likely attended the previous webinar, but if not, just a reminder that the link to that is on slide 3. So zero net carbon and zero net energy schools are an evolution of sustainable high performance school buildings. So the concept of sustainable buildings has been around for quite some time, but these zero net energy and zero net carbon buildings are the current iteration and really the future of all buildings. They deliver cost avoidance from utility bills to the classroom and the facilities. They create these comfortable and productive learning environments. There's a ton of data on what they've done for the learning environment. They provide these hands-on, future-focused learning opportunities, and they can ultimately contribute to stronger and more resilient communities. NBI has been researching this market for years and have learned that the concept of getting to zero over time is a really successful approach. So getting to zero over time is a concept introduced to our good friends over at the Rocky Mountain Institute. And really, this concept takes a long-term strategic approach to energy management, where the main focus is on the benefit to the learning environment. And this process leverages every opportunity to improve energy performance in the building life cycle. And that's from lighting retrofits and equipment replacement to modernization and new construction. These districts set measurable goals for a portfolio and individual projects by using policies and guidance documents to help achieve these goals over time, and then regularly report on progress. So in our research, NBI has noticed several commonalities or key steps taken by school districts that have successfully achieved that zero target. And our presenters are going to dive a little bit more into these steps in a bit and provide the case studies of successful projects and the technologies used to achieve the ZNE and ZNC goal. But first, I'm going to dive a little deeper into what is commonly the first step, which is gaining support for your Z&E and Z&C goal with storytelling and the extremely important role of the Zero Hero or Sustainability Champion. You know, students are the ultimate zero heroes. We've seen this enormous uptake in students demanding change in our systems and our built environments to mitigate climate impacts. This is their future. It's important we listen to their demand and be those champions or zero heroes that implement change that really support their needs and the environment. So in our research, we've seen that every project and every successful district has a champion. We like to refer to them as the zero hero. Oftentimes the zero hero is on staff, but honestly, it could also be a trusted consultant, an architect, a construction member, a committed board member. The sky is the limit for who this sustainability champion can be. And this person is there to establish your zero energy and zero net carbon goals and defend them to ensure that they're considered throughout the entire process. When NBI first started tracking these zero energy and zero net carbon buildings, projects were thought of on this kind of individual basis as opposed to on a portfolio scale. But how do you get market transformation on a portfolio scale? So what really defines this concept of getting to zero over time is that energy and carbon goals are being implemented on that district-wide scale. So we're seeing that these zero heroes are the ones responsible for developing policies that are there to support the goals at the district and then making sure they're implemented from project to project, including new construction, retrofits, and those system or equipment replacements. And not only that, we're seeing more and more that these champions are supporting this aspect of tying the building level work being done, building level work being done on energy back into student learning outcomes. And the champion's role may change from project to project. It is not linear, it's very iterative, especially as more successful projects come online. And that is why having a zero hero is so important to ensure that the outcomes from project to project bring the full district to zero. So gaining support is really the responsibility of the champion. They're essentially the cheerleader to ensure energy and sustainability is considered throughout the process and at the correct times. That's kind of a really important nugget there, is at the correct time. Because if you're doing this at the correct time, that's where you really avoid any overage costs. Improvements to buildings happen primarily for educational purposes, so often getting a seat at the table, the sustainability champion can really help ensure those energy goals are considered alongside the decisions being made. And one of the things we've seen with successful districts is that a critical part of the champion's work is developing trust with internal and external groups at the district. So for example, facilities and grounds or capital construction, board, superintendent, whoever. An important part is making sure that they listen to each other and that every person is best understood and that any issues or needs in the portfolio are taken into consideration. That way a plan can be developed to overcome any challenges and do this in a cost-effective and collaborative way. This open process creates a sense of trust throughout and helps energy be considered into parts of the process where it's possible that the champion may not be. They can't be everywhere. The champions are the one who finds synergy with other projects. They hear about other projects happening and they might say, oh, wow, we can incorporate an energy improvement project there. Or, oh gosh, this is a great opportunity to remove a natural gas-based piece of equipment or infrastructure and ultimately reduce carbon emissions. And this can really help identify any low-hanging fruit, capitalize on those easier projects to develop that positive track record so that you can continue to demonstrate success. And in addition to this internal team buy-in, you need support from all stakeholders across the community. These stakeholders can include school decision-making staff, community members, school boards, pretty much anyone. Like I said earlier, the sky is the limit for who you need buy-in from. In order to gain their support, though, you really need to understand their drivers and what key messages might appeal to them. And to communicate this importance of Z&E or Z&C, you can do things like share case studies and fact sheets, tour nearby schools so they can see that a zero net carbon or zero net energy is achievable and tangible, and it's real, right? It's really important to be able to actually, feel how achievable a zero net energy or zero net carbon school is. So specifically, the stories that come out of these projects, the lessons learned, the good, the great, the not so great included, are really powerful tools to engage the community and get them on board with the goals you set for your building or your district. Stories can make getting to zero more relatable and approachable. The subject or storyteller can really range from anybody, right? It can be students, educators, design team members, or it can be stories of the process of getting to zero as a whole. It's a good reminder when either telling stories or searching out stories to support your goals that ultimately the biggest pitch for zero energy buildings is that these buildings are built to educate students. They're not just there to operate and be buildings. So you can utilize them as a learning lab that provides these hands-on, tangible learning opportunities for students. For example, you can see in this slide here that in Los Angeles Unified School District, students are being taught to perform ASHRAE Level 1 audits to audit their schools for energy efficiency upgrades. And this is a great example of tangible and cost and energy saving career tech learning that relates right back to concepts in the classroom. So I'm going to tell you a quick few stories as examples to really showcase how powerful storytelling can be. I hope some of you come out of this really jazzed and excited about what the power of students and the power of the Zero Hero can do. And the first two are powerful because, we as adults, even those of us who are Zero Heroes and we may drink the sustainability Kool-Aid, can be constrained by things like societal norms, budgets, things like that, making it difficult to find new solutions. And students really have the ability to think outside the box and gain support for solutions that benefit the whole school in a way we might not be able to. So Claire here is a student in Bozeman Public Schools, and she had learned the value and benefits of solar for her school, or she'd learned the benefits of solar and really wanted something implemented in her district. She started by petitioning the board for solar, which was met by a positive but not exactly enthusiastic response. She decided to run a school-wide campaign and for Halloween even dressed up as a solar panel. She ended up wearing that solar panel sign for an entire month, and she started to gain traction as the solar girl and even convinced people like her principal, seen here on the left, to wear it. And then, as you can see in the photo on the right, her persistence paid off and was incredibly successful. And now the district has plans to implement more solar in addition to energy efficiency upgrades. Focusing in on California, in Kern High School District in Bakersfield, students rallied the school board and testified with real data that they analyzed about how much money the district will save if switching to solar. So in a partnership with SunPower, the district installed 22 megawatts of solar power systems at 27 Kern High School District sites. And with the new solar installed, the district will save, wait for this number, $80 million over the next 25 years, which can be reinvested back into the schools. Dr. Scott Cole, the Associate Superintendent of Business, clearly saw value in this in his quote on the right hand here. So focusing in now on the actual sustainability champion, Los Osos Middle School participated in the Prop 39 Z&E pilot program that was administered by the California Investor-Owned Utilities. And at Los Osos Middle, Dave Houghton, who was a parent and energy consultant from Avila Partners, saw and brought the opportunity to utilize these Prop 39 pilot funds to upgrade their facility and retrofit their school to the Z&E goal. Dave knew to bring all stakeholders to the table to discuss how to achieve Z&E, and people included, utilities, school staff, consultants, students, etc. And at these meetings, they were able to come up with what he coined as the Z&E recipe, which was energy efficiency first to reduce the energy use intensity from 35 to 27, and utilize the existing 200-watt solar PV to offset the remaining energy use. Dave was there throughout the entire process and continues to engage with the school and district to ensure the Z&E outcome is operated to. Dave actually spoke on a previous webinar of ours a year or so ago. I mentioned that conversations with the school staff after construction were crucial to that outcome, teaching them how to use the new technology and then iteratively adjusting things like set points and controls so that it worked best for the teachers. And I think this is my last story, but from Southern California, Garden Grove Unified School District is a large low-income school district in California. It ranks among the lowest 20% of districts in terms of household income, but the top 20% in student test scores. And this culture of frugality means that they've consistently invested in students over facilities. And in this case, Garden Grove really saw that they needed to upgrade the facilities to benefit the student environment, like we were talking about earlier. They actually saw Z&E as an opportunity for long-term cost savings. So it's actually they wanted to do Z&E to be cost effective. And then they decided to also utilize the Prop 39 pilot as a vehicle to help achieve their goals of benefits to learning environment. So they actually upgraded a science high school classroom and an intermediate at the Ralston Intermediate School, the multi-purpose building. And the champion in all of this was the facility manager, a woman named Margie Brown. She was the force behind the Z&E message and continued to push the district to prioritize Z&E as the construction path. And you know, this story, I mentioned the good, the bad, the not so good, the great. Margie ended up leaving the district late in the project, and the funds for solar to offset the energy use was reprioritized. So the district did not achieve Z&E. However, with this not so happy ending, there's still incredible value in this story and in every story. This one really shows the absolute importance of having that zero hero continuity throughout the entire process to ensure that goals are achieved. I have a ton more stories, but we don't have that much time, so I'm going to kind of nip it here and just give you a quick, summation of the importance of the zero hero. The common thread here is, of course, this role of this person and the continuity of them throughout the entire process and throughout the district. And they gain support for the zero goal. They showcase success stories and use other forms of storytelling. They engage internal and external stakeholders, identify those synergies, capitalize on low-hanging fruits, and of course, engage students. So actually, I'm going to pass the slides back to Tina because she's going to talk a little bit about more locally the San Jose Heroes and the climate leadership.
Thanks, Riley. So I am going to talk about this pilot that I conducted earlier in the school year called the Climate Smart Youth Leaders Pilot. We did work with 4 schools in the Eastside Union High School District, which is an underserved community, some of which are disadvantaged communities. And it was an 8-month-long pilot as part of the Silicon Valley Energy Watch program to empower the high school students, the youth there, to change energy policy on campus. Now that right there is pretty different than most other school programs that I've worked with or heard of. The focus on policy specifically of the campus was pretty unique, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So we did a teacher workshop, of course. It was 2.5 days, which was pretty lengthy, to make sure that the teachers had, the resources they needed and that they really understood this 10-step long process that would take them all the way through December. And it includes STEM, project-based learning, NGSS, of course, all of the standard aligned requirements here in California, and including the local goals of San Jose and the Eastside Union High School District. We reached 240 high school students, which was pretty impressive. And we got 24 energy resource partners to be involved, so that's a pretty big number. They just really came out of the woodwork to work with us. And out of all of this, 54 student-driven energy projects. Now I want to talk about the projects a little bit here because some of them were a typical energy efficiency campaign focused on behavior change. For example, making a poster to remind folks to turn off the light when they left a room or to unplug Chromebooks, Chromebook carts rather. But a lot of these projects were really deep into policy. For example, there's a pool covering policy in this district that requires that pools are covered when not in use. And of course, there's stipulations on that. But students really dove into that and found out that it wasn't being enforced, that the policy wasn't being followed. And they really took it to the next step to enhance that policy and do some permanent signage to remind all users of the policy and why it's important. So that was a huge win at the end of this semester-long project. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about 3 main takeaways of this pilot. First and foremost is that our main partner called EarthForce, they were so integral. They were the nucleus of all of this. And I encourage everyone on this call to Google EarthForce. It's definitely something you should know about if you're not already in the know. They have this youth civic engagement model wherein students are driving each and every step. And it starts with how they are exposed to the problem. Instead of the city or the teachers standing up in front of a class and doing a slideshow about the big problems and why they should care and kind of spewing out information for them to absorb. Instead of that, we did this learning lab approach where we took the students throughout their campus and gave them a behind the scenes view of how energy was being used on their campus. So we took them to the boiler rooms and we showed them how that worked. We highlighted some things that maybe weren't working so well. We took them in the pump room of their pool house, for example, and of course in the classroom, and looked at outdoor lighting and solar and the whole package, and really just exposed them to how energy was being used. And from there, the students explored what the problems were for themselves, and they developed a list of what they thought the big issues were, and from there developed projects. So very unique approach, and Earth Force really has coined this model. I really encourage you to look into that. Secondly, the semester-long attack here, much more than just coming into a classroom and doing a PowerPoint presentation, or maybe guiding an energy audit, or doing a kilowatt-hour activity to look at lighting in the classroom. Those things have been done, and there's lots out there for teachers. Instead, this was really a continuous effort to keep the students engaged, answer their questions, and guide them towards stakeholder engagement so that they could be successful with their policy projects. And lastly, we did a project-based learning inspired exhibition, sort of like an end of program celebration. 200 community members attended that. And you can see the pictures here. We did a student panel, which 2 students from each school represented. And we had a council member moderate this panel. These students blew everybody away. Their insights and ideas about solutions for their campus were just incredible. And the fact that we gave them a stage and showed them that we hear you, that we care. Local government, school leaders, the whole community, we really care about your thoughts on energy. So I'm totally happy to talk more about this if we have time in the Q&A or offline, but this is my Zero Hero example. Thanks, Riley.
Thanks, Tina. So I am going to actually pass the mouse and the mic off to David Kaneda and John Andrew, who are both principals at Integral Group. So I'm going to give you the mouse here, David.
Not yet.
Try it now.
Got it.
Sweet, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Riley. John Andrew and I are here from Integral Group to talk to you a little bit about some of the net zero carbon schoolwork that we've done. So a little bit about Integral Group. We are a mechanical, electrical, plumbing, engineering firm, but our specialty is deep green projects, and we've done a lot of schoolwork, especially here in the Bay Area. Here you can see a little bit of the award-winning work that we've done. So before I get really deep into this, I wanted to talk a little bit about net zero. And early on, a lot of our work was trying to offset the electrical use. So we call that net zero electric energy as opposed to net zero energy, because there's still gas in the building, and we weren't necessarily trying to offset the use of the gas. As time went on, we've done a lot of projects that are all electric and have renewables on them to offset the electrical energy use. I used to call that net zero energy, but now the term seems to be net zero carbon. So, zero net carbon. So ZNC. ZNE now, I guess we call a building that potentially has gas in it, but offsets the gas use with extra renewable energy. So a great example of that is the NREL building, which does have some gas burning, but actually oversized their PV system to offset it. So having said that, the first part of this presentation, what I want to do is just kind of show you that there's already been a lot of schoolwork that's been done that's net zero energy. It's not something that's brand new. It's not something that's terribly difficult to do, especially here in California. and there's already a fair amount of it that's been done. So it's not something to be scared of. So this is our first net zero electric energy project. It was done back in 2004. So what is that? 16 years ago. It's in Campbell Union High School District, Westmont High School, and then another project, Delmar High School, another science building. In that same district, later we went in and did PV projects in the parking lots for all 8 sites that they have. And interestingly enough, I guess you could call this net zero electric, but actually I guess it would really be net zero electric energy costs, because the PV systems were slightly undersized so that the bills would go down to zero. That's probably no longer the case because the rate structures have changed and the high rates have shifted till later in the day. But anyway, these were at the time designed to be net zero electric energy cost. Another project, or 2 other projects up in Oakland, is Met West High School, which is also net zero electric energy, and La Escuelita Elementary School, which is the same. Our first net zero carbon project was here in San Jose. It's the George Leyva Middle School Admin Building, which is in Evergreen School District. Another project, this actually isn't in the Bay Area, is on Oahu in Hawaii. Was a kind of beta test for a portable project that was net zero carbon, or zero net carbon, and then a whole series of buildings that we did for that multi-purpose buildings that we did in Campbell Union School District here in the South Bay, that are also net zero carbon. And then most recently we did a elementary school, again for Oakland Unified School District, that's zero net carbon. We've done also a series of projects for private schools. So this is Lick Wilmerding. All these are in the Bay Area. Sonoma Academy, Bishop O'Dowd, the Mark Day School. This one's just recently completed, so we don't have photographs. Sacred Heart Academic Arts Building, and Marin County Day Schools Science Building. And one we have under design currently is the Castellea School in Palo Alto. Then we've also done some higher education projects. Pitzer College down in LA. CSU East Bay is in design, a library on the east side of the bay, and a downtown center for UC Merced. And then a couple of projects, these aren't schools, but I thought their significance, I wanted to talk about them just so people can understand that this is really becoming a mainstream thing. So this is one of a series of 5 projects that we've done that are remodels, low-cost remodels of existing buildings. So this one was for a for-profit developer, and you know, it's gotten to the point where renewables are cost-effective enough that he decided he could do this to make a profit. So this is the Indio building. There's 3 new construction buildings that we've been involved with that are also for-profit developers that are net zero or zero net carbon. And then we've also done municipal buildings that are zero net carbon, and a series of community buildings. These, John, were involved with two libraries, one in Half Moon Bay and then another one in Hayward. And this one is, the last one is kind of interesting. This is in design still. It's not only zero net carbon for the city of Redwood City, they actually went a step further and are putting a microgrid in, so this building can be used for resiliency. So the idea is if there's an earthquake or a fire event, that they can use this building if people lose their homes to temporarily put people up. So John, I'm handing over to you. Oh, Riley, John's muted.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Okay.
Can you hear me now? Great.
Yep, good to hear.
Hi, everyone. John Andary with the Integral Group. So talking a little bit about the process we use when we're designing these zero energy projects. You know, we've got over 100 zero net energy, zero net carbon projects, and it's a very intentional process that is a little unique, I think, sometimes for public schools, because we do a lot of energy modeling and design analytics and analysis early in the design process. And so while this is not uncommon for a lot of other project types, including private schools, it can be uncommon for public school projects. And so I want to make a point here that how important this is on the left side of the screen to spend the time early on to get it right at the very earliest stages of conceptual design, in architects engaging with their engineers and energy modeling teams and et cetera to get the basic building form, siding, and systems and sorted out at a stage when you can really do that at a really cost effectively without a lot of add-ons later. So that's really important to our process and how we've been successful with all of these zero energy projects. At the other end of the screen, of course, is the other. And once we're finished with these projects, to be able to measure and verify that they are actually working. So the energy modeling you're doing during design is really important to be as predictive as possible. That energy modeling, not just comparing to some code, but really predicting the energy use of the building so that you can measure and verify and certify that the building is performing after the fact to zero net energy, zero net carbon. Next slide.
So John, one of the things with this slide also is it seems like on a lot of the projects that we've done together, we've set, what's the word? I guess we set targets for energy efficiency or EUI for a project, and then gone back as we're doing the design and kind of agreed with the design team that we're going to stick with them. So that's a key thing too, don't you think?
That is, yeah, absolutely, and I'll talk about that as part of a case study here that I'm going to show you. But in the middle, on the back to the left side here, where it says passive architecture design and tipping point analysis, what that means is go to the next slide, and we'll try to describe what that means. So one of the things we talk about a lot is the idea of cost transfer, and that is focusing on passive architectural strategies that can save a lot of energy in the design of the building through just simple strategies that I mentioned: siding, organizing the building, solar orientation, etc., natural cooling, etc., that will allow you to sort of reduce the size and complexity of mechanical systems. And then ideally, you can take the cost, the budget out of those mechanical electrical systems and move it into the architecture or budget for the project, enhance that architectural budget. I mean, this is really great for the owner, the school districts, or the school leadership, because you're investing in the architecture of the building, which lasts 50 plus years, instead of engineering systems which only last 15 to 25 years, have to be replaced, require maintenance, and use energy. So the more you can focus on architectural strategies to save energy and get to down to the EUI, the annual energy target you're looking for, the better. And again, this is our way of thinking about how to do this, and our success around over 100 of these kinds of projects, we're really using this kind of philosophy. Next. All right, so let's look at a couple strategies. I think the video was great that we saw, and it kind of started to investigate a little bit on the strategies, but let's talk about it a little bit more here. Go to the next slide. Okay, so again, focusing on the skin of the building in this kind of cost transfer idea. Now, this is not a school building that you're looking at here, but I put it in the presentation because it's another project we did that is a really interesting example of how you can present data to clients and do analysis, early analysis to start to understand where these cost transfer and energy reduction through developing the right skin design can work for you on a school project. So it doesn't matter if this is an office building, but same principle works for on a school. And so looking at these different facade options, and then you can see at the bottom that the EUI, the annual energy use, we're identifying the reduction in annual energy use simply by a different skin or envelope solution. And in addition to that, you can see where the tonnage, the total cooling tonnage, is reduced from the left to the right. The more we focus on that, on controlling the envelope of the building. Same with this mechanical system cost, reduced, reduced. So now you've got the ability to find this cost transfer, find the ways of optimizing the envelope to reduce the size and complexity of the mechanical system, reduce the overall energy use, and by putting more into the envelope of the building. Go to the next slide. And it's similar, this project that David actually showed you a couple minutes ago. This is that you said, and fixed budget project that typically the idea here of adding a very large, intricate brise-soleil type of a screen on the outside of the building to control solar gain into the building might seem like it's not going to meet the budget of the building. However, on this project, what you see on the bottom two screens is an indication of solar radiation that's hitting the building. We were able to reduce the mechanical system size and complexity on this project to be able to then take out of the mechanical systems the cost to pay for the brise-soleil that you see up there at the top, the big shading device on the outside of the building, and then and turn this building into a zero net carbon building with a really reduced EUI. So that's another just example that could apply to kind of any kind of education building. Next. So skin was first, HVAC is second, and kind of like you heard in the video, it's all about heat pumps. That's your methodology for getting to an all-electric building. And there are so many versions and flavors of heat pumps. I thought a lot about how I would explain all of them in this presentation, and decided I wasn't even going to try because there are so many different versions. But commonly, you'll see some of these on the screen. There are just a few of the sort of methodologies. An air source heat pump on the far left is like an air-cooled chiller. If folks on the phone have seen that or used, not uncommon around the country to use those on small to mid-size education projects. But the air source heat pump switches over from cooling to heating. Essentially, it works the same as an air source chiller, but also provides hot water, and it can actually do it simultaneously, chilled and hot water to your building. In the middle is a VRF heat pump. may have heard of this as it provides refrigerant to the buildings and to fan coils in buildings. We are somewhat shying away from this system because of the high global warming potential of due to leakage of refrigerant. The manufacturers are working hard to kind of mitigate that, but that should be taken into account if you're considering VRF heat pumps. On the bottom right is just a simple heat pump that sits on the roof and is all packaged and provides air to the building, either hot or cold air to the building. These have been around for decades and decades, and a very simple off-the-shelf kind of product that can be used in school projects, easily used in school projects. And then above that is a similar to the air source heat pump. This is a domestic water heat pump that just provides hot water for domestic water purposes. There are lots of different domestic water heat pump styles, but this is for a larger facility that can do a significant amount of domestic hot water heating using a heat pump. There are lots of other flavors and lots of ways to use all of these different devices. I dare not try to go into them in this presentation, but I thought I'd just give you a flavor of these heat pumps are all about, and that's the way to get to your all-electric building. Go to the next slide, Dave. The other important mechanical strategy on most, if not all, of these zero energy projects we're doing is using heat recovery, especially on there if you have a DOAS system, which a DOAS system is a system that brings fresh air into the building decoupled from the cooling and heating systems in the building. And so when you're doing that, you can pre-cool or preheat that fresh air that's coming into the building using heat recovery. It's very common in California and where we're doing a lot of our work, but I think also common elsewhere in the country. But quite important to reduce that EUI and deal with the energy it takes to cool and heat the fresh air coming into the building. Even doubly so if you bring 100% fresh air into the building, which is sort of the current thinking around how to design in a post-COVID world. Schools, offices, or any other kind of building is bringing more fresh air into the building, even 100% fresh air into the building, instead of recirculating air. Recommendations from ASHRAE on how to mitigate transmission of aerosols, et cetera, in buildings. So that's a super important one. Go to the next one, Dave. Also, put in the HVAC category is ceiling fans. We use ceiling fans in lots of our projects, and there's a great deal of data out there on how well ceiling fans can increase thermal comfort while increasing the temperature in a building. So if you look to the right there in the red circle, you can see that for a typical airspeed of a ceiling fan, the comfort range, which might normally be for cooling in between 70 and 76, can be in a range up from 74 to even over 80 degrees, where people are comfortable if they have enough air movement on them. So this is really important to reduce energy use and actually provide higher levels of comfort at higher temperatures, cooling temperatures. So you're setting your thermostat up and using a low energy ceiling fans to move air. It's a great strategy, and I'll show you an example in a minute. Next slide. The other thing we do a lot here in California and in the West predominantly, but also of course done in more humid climates, is natural ventilation. So we have lots of school buildings and other kinds of buildings that use a manual and automated windows for natural cooling, and the automated windows are particularly useful for what we call night flush. So if you're west of the Rockies, we get these very deep swings in temperature at night, and so cooling off the building, cooling off the mass of the building, exposing some of the concrete in the building and other massive components of the building, and that you can cool off at night is a great way to modulate the temperature in the building, reduce the need for cooling. And in the example graph you see here, which is the building on the left side, is a building that is predominantly all naturally cooled, even though it has a cooling and heating system and heat pumps. The strategy with using some automated windows is so effective that even when it's 88 degrees the following day, because the night is nice and cool and gets down to 56 degrees, cooling off all the concrete mass in the building allows the building to modulate temperature, and without any cooling systems engaged, you can make the temperature in the building never gets above 74 degrees. And these are actual temperatures taken within this building in Silicon Valley. So just an example of how this kind of strategy can be used effectively in really any kind of building, whether it's a school building or office building or any other kind of building. Very effective strategy for reducing energy use and hitting your low EUI target. Go to the next slide. All right, that's for you, Dave. Dave, you're going to speak to this one?
Yeah. Sorry, I had to unmute myself. So getting into light, this is starting to become a no-brainer. It's use LED light fixtures. The efficiency of LED is higher than anything else now that's out there. And then the knock-on value of LED is that when you combine it with daylighting and put dimming in, LED, it turns out, is much more efficient at dimming than fluorescent or incandescent. So you get higher efficiency to start with, and then as you dim down the lights to accommodate daylighting, then you even get better efficiency. And then, of course, you want to combine that with daylighting. So this is a study that we were doing, looking at a school building at daylighting at different times of the year. So as much as possible, we want to use daylighting, and of course, in schools, they're used predominantly during daylight hours. So there's great opportunities to incorporate daylighting and save lots of energy. Another thing that I feel like we don't talk about enough is reducing plug load. So this study on the left for the Packard Foundation, the energy savings were found through just purchasing more efficient equipment as they were replacing equipment. It wasn't any special fancy controls. It was just looking at best in class efficiency of equipment and buying the stuff that was more efficient. In a lot of cases, it didn't cost any more than what they would have purchased. In addition to that, in buildings, it's code that you have to have plug load controls, but in existing buildings, you can put in things like countdown timers or plug strips with aux sensors to turn things off when either there's nobody in the room or on some kind of a clock. And then the last thing, we put this under plug loads, and I guess technically it's not, but we're starting to do a lot of all electric kitchens. So I think that's a big thing. There's potentially quite a bit of energy savings. I've done projects where they've cut the energy use in the kitchen in half or below that. And one of some of the key pieces of equipment are induction stovetops that are electric and perform, I would argue, better than gas. And also they're more efficient and also have a lower requirement for ventilation. So a lot of the energy is not just saved in the stovetop, it's also saved in the reduced amount of ventilation that you need and the reduced amount of makeup air that you need. Another device is something called a combi oven, which is this kind of high-tech oven that uses wet heat, not just heat, and kind of convection to cook things. And those ovens are programmable, so you can actually get better control over the quality that comes out of the ovens. And then the last thing is, once you've gone all electric, reduce the energy use as much as possible, then you put renewables in. And the great news is that the cost of installed cost of solar panels has come down dramatically over time. And so it makes good financial sense to, in general, it makes good financial sense to put solar panels in, but in schools it makes even better sense, because I mean, if there's going to be a building that's in use forever and ever, it's a school. You know, a lot of offices, they're turning them and redoing the insides and changing stuff on the outsides and knocking buildings down in, you know, a couple of years or 5 years or 10 years. But schools seem to, once a building's built, they seem to last forever and be used forever. So I think there's a great argument to use renewables in schools. And certainly in the Bay Area, you see photovoltaics now in you know, practically every school site.
Well, okay, thanks, Dave. I'm gonna present a case study of a public school project that is in construction now. That is a ZNC project, and this is PUSD is Piedmont United School District. It says two buildings on this in this project. One is a STEAM building, one is a theater building. The STEAM building is a bunch of engineering and art labs. And the architect for this project is a great architect. You saw an image of another one of their ZNC projects earlier in the presentation. HKID Architects in Oakland, California, does a lot of public school projects and becoming quite the expert at zero net energy and zero net carbon building design. So next slide, Dave. Real quickly, we started with the benchmark at the beginning of the project of what these types of building energy use would be in the climate zone where it's located. It's located. Piedmont is just outside of Oakland, California, and then we were setting a rough order magnitude energy target for ZNC. This is kind of at the very beginning of the project. And started to think about how we were going to get there. And so next slide, Dave. The first strategies we were going to look at were working on the envelope, as you've heard me mention before, bring that EUI down from 44 to 38 is where we thought we could get. The next slide is working on high performance HVAC systems, get down a little closer, down to maybe around the 28 level. And then next slide, Dave. And then maybe managing that equipment energy, as Dave was talking about, the plug load energy, to try to, these are sort of just targets that we had at the beginning of the project to try to get down to where we needed to be, to where we thought we needed to be to hit our zero net energy, zero net carbon target. Next slide. Early in the design process, schematic level, we were looking at multiple HVAC options and all electric options. Some of these I just showed you earlier in the slide deck, and sort of rough order magnitude energy modeling, not knowing a lot about the building's form and function and programming, but just trying to target different systems that might be appropriate for this school building, and particularly the STEAM building, and develop these early strategies, the VRF strategy, the air source heat pump strategy, and then on the inside of the building, looking at two different options, whether there would be fan coil units that would deliver air to the space, or using radiant cooling and heating in the slabs of the building. Was our other option, which would get us a lower energy use because you're eliminating a tremendous amount of the fan energy typically associated with these kind of buildings. So that's early stage. Again, the bars at the bottom, the green and yellow bars are quite large because we didn't have a lot of information about how the building was going to function. So those were pretty conservative. Go to the next slide, Dave. And so we started working on the envelope of the building and form of the building and some pretty aggressive shading strategies that we were investigating and doing a lot of daylight modeling to see how we could get the maximum penetration of daylight into the classrooms of the building. And so you can kind of see on these the two images on the right-hand side toward the bottom there, some strategies to bounce light in from the south, sort of southeast side of the building, one being a light shelf that could bounce light in, and another being light redirecting film that would be on the top portion of the glazing, and it redirects the light up across the ceiling to bounce it in further into the classroom, so that we could obviously keep the lights off as much as possible in that space. So very aggressively looking at envelope strategies after that schematic design stage to see how we could get that EUI lower and lower. Go to the next slide, Dave. And we did that. We got the EUI down a good bit lower and decided to go with the radiant cooling and heating strategy in the STEAM building to get down to where we could hit our target EUI, which was 24 was what we ended up targeting based on the capacity of renewable production that we could do on this kind of unusual site. Go to the next slide, Dave. It's quite a lot of topography on this site, and the building the form of the buildings, the architectural style of the buildings required us to do some pretty creative things with the PV design for these buildings in order to max out what we could in terms of production. So you can kind of see all the different places where we're proposing that the PV goes, so we can maximize our production and get to that 24 EUI target. That's a lot of different PV installations there that required a full design of the PV system. And the PV actually was coming from a third party through a power purchase agreement for this project. Go to the next slide, Dave. And so at the end of the day, with this STEAM building, we do these kind of cartoons to kind of help show what our strategies are and how these buildings work. You can kind of see on the left there all the different strategies we ended up incorporating into this public school project, which had a fixed budget, but we were able to incorporate all of these great strategies into the building. Radiant floors, operable windows, ceiling fans, the air source heat pumps to serving children hot water to the slabs, and etc. The radiant slab strategy is can be quite cost effective if you do it the right way. In this case, the building height and the floor-to-floor heights were quite tight. So the radiant floor systems eliminates a lot of the ductwork that would typically kind of be in the rooms. So the ceilings can be higher, and there's a lot of sort of trade-offs there with the radiant when you use a radiant systems to in terms of floor-to-floor height. And when you reduce the floor-to-floor height, you reduce the cost of the skin, and lots of different trade-offs there to allow you to do something really nice like radiant cooling and heating, which provides great thermal comfort and reduced energy use. So go to the next slide, Dave, and mentioned at the beginning, there was this theater building that was also part of the project. And so the air source heat pump on the steam building also provides cool, chilled in hot water to this building that then uses a sort of what we call displacement ventilation air system up under the seats in the theater to provide cooling there. And again, obviously all electric buildings, all electric domestic hot water. This building's next slide. And there's a nice rendering of the final design. You can see this shading devices and the PV up on the roofs, on the mansard roofs, and et cetera. And these projects are under construction now. And again, a great example for a public school project of how to kind of do the right kind of trade-offs of costs and architectural and engineering strategies to hit your target zero net carbon energy use in production. Next slide, Dave. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit, Dave and I, about what we think is on the horizon, the next sort of big things, and so go to the next slide. One of the things we're thinking a lot about and incorporating to a lot of projects these days is mass timber. So in terms of zero carbon, not just in operation, but in the construction, using wood and mass timber to sequester carbon in the buildings and offset the carbon of construction. The little chart here is indicating from Architecture 2030 that business as usual, your embodied carbon over the next 30 years is be equivalent to your operational carbon. So getting the carbon out of construction is important. And in this project, it's called Kresge College at University at UC Santa Cruz, is an all electric project. 14 different buildings that are all electric, and we are hoping will end up being a zero net carbon project because although we can't produce any energy from PV on the site because of all these tall trees, there's a PV array elsewhere on the campus that we're going to be allocating toward this project, plus the university purchases zero carbon energy in addition to that. So even though this is a multi-building project, we're going to go for a total zero carbon strategy by using mass timber and all electric renewable energy. So next one.
So I wanted to talk about a couple other interesting things that are going on these days. One is that some of the utilities, one in our area, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, are actually sourcing 100% of their energy from carbon-free sources. So they say they're 100% carbon-free power, and what it really means is 100% net carbon-free power. So that's something where if you're in that area and you're getting your power from Silicon Valley Clean Energy, then you could say that your site is carbon-free. However, there's some interesting things to look at. So everybody's heard about the duck curve, and so kind of the energy mix and energy use varies through the course of the day and through the course of the year, depending on the amount of PV that's generating power and kind of what the loads are on the grid. So this is an interesting slide for California. It represents a whole year. At the top is midnight, and at the bottom is midnight again. So it's the 24 hours of the day, and then from left to right are the months of the year. So you could see kind of, what is that, January, February, March, April, May, June. The power is pretty green, but there's lots of times of the year where you could see that red area. What that means is as soon as you go into the pink, you're generating more carbon dioxide than you would with a high efficiency gas turbine generating the electricity. So there's still carbon being emitted on the grid, even if your facility is net zero carbon. And so that gets to the point of why should you, if you could be, 100% carbon-free power, why should you put renewables on your site? So I think one of the interesting things that we've started looking at for schools is the idea of looking at battery storage. So we're in design on a couple of projects, and it's a pretty interesting concept that you could tie renewables and battery storage together and do two things. One thing is you could store that energy and release it at a time when there is carbon on the grid, so you could actually help to reduce kind of overall carbon on the grid. But the other thing you can do if you have those batteries is, as we're starting to have power outages during fire season, if you have a small battery, potentially you could bring your system back up during a fire season outage and run off the PV system. So with PV alone, you can't turn the power back on during a utility outage, but if you have a battery tied to it into a microgrid, you could. So if you have a big PV array, you could actually potentially keep the school open and run a school during those times. So now with fire season outages, that's a big thing. And then the last thing I wanted to throw on the table, just as a point for designers to think about, is EV charging. So EVs are becoming a bigger and bigger thing. This is actually a charging setup at Prospect High School in Campbell. And so as time goes on, there's going to be greater and greater demand for EV charging in the parking lots. And that energy needs to come from somewhere too. So there may be an argument for putting in more photovoltaics in those cases. So that's our presentation. And can we take questions now, Riley?
Riley? Well, this is Connie, and I am going to ask you guys a few questions. You did bring up embodied carbon with the Kresge campus building. What about the others that you spoke of earlier in the presentation? Does the ZNC refer to any embodied carbon or only the fuel-based carbon?
So the projects that we showed were all looking at operational carbon, not embodied carbon.
Okay.
The one project, the college project, is the one where we're trying to offset the embodied carbon and in addition to the operational carbon.
Yeah, and honestly, that's kind of a very new thing in the building industry. So I've got a couple of non-school projects in construction that are kind of mass timber, and I wouldn't even say that they're net zero embodied carbon, but they're using mass timber, so which greatly reduces the embodied carbon, since the majority of it is in the structure of a building in either steel or concrete. So it's a new thing that we're seeing more and more of, but it's still not common at all.
Okay. I had a couple questions here. One about the radiation results from your modeling, and another one about the program that you used for solar and daylighting studies.
John, you want to take that, or you want
to say radiation? I'm sorry. What?
There was an earlier photo or a graphic.
It was
being used.
Merced, John.
Oh yeah, okay. So our daylighting team, they work in the Root Radiance program. Radiance is sort of it's a very powerful daylight modeling program. I only know enough about it to be dangerous, because I'm a mechanical engineer. I don't do that in work, but The there are softwares that you can utilize that are a sort of an interface to Radiance, and I think there are a number of different softwares that can be that interface. Our modelers work directly in Radiance software, which I think is kind of harder. You have to kind of understand the code a little more, but they prefer that because they can create more accurate models in their mind of what the space will be and what the resulting daylighting will be. My understanding is that the same software is used for those radiation diagrams, those annual radiation diagrams on the facade of the buildings.
Yeah, some of those softwares that John are talking about are like Diva or Spot is another one. But yeah, our team works in native Radiance.
Okay, and just one more quick question before we move forward with the rest of our presentation today. Can reliable dehumidification be achieved with a DOAS system?
Oh yes, absolutely. I'll give you a good example is a zero net carbon project that is in construction right now that I worked on is the ASHRAE headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. Designed last year, it's in construction this year, and we are using radiant cooling and heating in that building. So we have to have a super effective dehumidification system in the building, and all the dehumidification is done with the DOAS system. So you can imagine if we weren't effectively dehumidifying with that DOAS system in that humid Atlanta climate, the radiant ceiling panels, in this case it's ceiling panels that are chilled and heated, would condense when they're in cooling mode. But we have so the DOAS system can be very effective at dehumidification. Not a problem there.
Okay, Riley, do you want to continue with the presentation?
Sounds great. Thanks, Connie. Sorry about the double muted issue earlier, everyone. You'd think technology would get easier, but it just doesn't seem to. So I'm going to next pass the slides off to Carrie Brown of Resource Refocus, who will introduce us to some of those technologies, and especially technologies in the Prop 39 retrofit pilot program that David and I had talked about earlier. So I'm going to control your slides, Carrie. Just let me know next slide when you're ready.
Okay, great. Thanks, Riley. Go to the next slide. And the next one. So today I'll be focusing on the results from an investor-owned utility Prop 39 Z&E retrofit pilot. This was a subset of the statewide Prop 39 program, and the goal of this retrofit pilot was to demonstrate the technical feasibility of Z&E retrofits in public K-14 schools. We looked at 12 statewide demonstration projects, and these were split into 4 levels of support: design, consultation, construction, inspection, and commissioning support, incremental cost support, and then M&P. And if you're interested, the final report is available. You can download it at that link. Next slide. For our retrofit pilot, the Z&E retrofits were targeting energy use intensities of 16 to 22. And just for reference, there was a statewide study that looked at retrofit potential in school buildings, and for primary and secondary schools, they were looking at the low 20s statewide. So our target was aggressive, but not wild. Next slide. And just a quick note, again, echoing some of the earlier notes on zero net energy versus zero carbon. In recent years in California, there's been a switch to zero carbon goals, but this pilot was designed in 2014, and at that point, the focus was more on zero net energy. We were looking at this from a site and a source energy perspective. If you're not familiar, for site energy, that meant that we were taking the gas and electricity and converting that to a common unit, and then taking National Department of Energy source multipliers to get your source energy, energy use intensity, which represents how much energy is used at the very beginning of the process to get that energy to your site. In this case, the national multipliers have electricity at about 3 and gas is about 1. And so in some cases, you would see that gas measures were recommended as a more efficient option from a source perspective. If you switch over to the more recent zero carbon goals, in California, as our grid's getting cleaner and cleaner, the relative emissions from electricity are going down over time. Gas is staying pretty steady, and so you're generally going to see electrification as the recommendation there. Next slide. I'll split this into 3 main topics. First is some guiding lessons learned, which will echo some of the notes that Riley talked about, which I think are really helpful when you're thinking about framing your package. Then I'll talk about some technologies that we saw commonly across the project. And then finally, I'll go over some brief cost and energy impact. Next slide. For the guiding lessons learned, I think one of the most important things to look at first is just making sure that you're approaching the retrofit in the right order. First and foremost, we want it to focus on comfort and health above anything else. And we also wanted to make sure that we were aligning ourselves with any other retrofits that were happening or renovation needs that were necessary. And then where appropriate, push for more energy efficiency measures or more energy efficient measures. Next slide. So once we understood that landscape, then we would start looking at what measures to implement. And we would start with load reduction, so that meant a tighter envelope, bringing down the lighting and plug loads, and then looking at mechanical design, and then looking at the equipment. And then at the very end, supplementing that with renewables. With a zero net energy goal, you could just size your renewable system to meet your original load, and that would have an environmental impact, but it wouldn't change the quality of your classrooms. So this is, a large part of why we're recommending this order. Next slide. A big thing is just making sure to highlight the non-energy, non-monetized benefits to the schools rather than expecting energy savings alone to pay for aggressive whole building retrofits. We thought this might be a sticking point for schools, but we kind of found that the schools came to the table saying, these are the things we want. If we can save energy and money at the same time, that's great. And one of the school consultants, I think, said it well, where she said, the ultimate goal is a learning environment that's the best we can possibly get. Next slide. And also just be cognizant that in a retrofit scenario where we're trying not to affect occupancy, any minor delays can really delay your construction timeline. We were trying to get all the work done over the summers or over breaks, so a small delay sometimes meant we were delayed by an entire year. Next slide. And then finally, echoing Riley's Zero Hero, strong advocates were absolutely critical to the successful project. And for us, this often wasn't the final decision maker, but it was someone who could help us navigate the landscape of the school. And when we had our on-site meetings, it was really important that we had both decision makers and facility staff in the room so that we had folks that were familiar with the day-to-day nitty-gritty operations. But we also had folks that understood sort of district level decisions and could help us think through what was feasible or what wasn't. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to go through some of the common technologies that we saw, and you'll see there's a lot of overlap with the new construction technologies in the last presentation, but because we're looking at a retrofit, we had a slightly more constrained set of options. Next slide. The common targets are pretty similar to the last one. We're looking at lighting, daylighting controls, domestic hot water, HVAC, and also just making sure to address any deferred maintenance needs. Next slide. The first one, lighting, this is, as David said, this is a no-brainer. The question wasn't whether we were recommending LED retrofits, it was just how. And there were sort of 2 main ways to go through this. You could either replace the entire fixture, which is typically the best technical solution. You got an entirely new system. But this does trigger Title 24 dimming control requirements, which are more expensive. So if that wasn't feasible in the school, the other option is to keep the fixture, but just replace the bulbs. You have some cost savings by avoiding the dimming control, but you also lose some of the functionality. But in the case where we were either going to do the lighting retrofit or not, if this meant we could still do it, you still saw substantial energy savings, and sometimes it freed up funds for other measures. And then working with these LED retrofits to introduce or reintroduce schedule and occupancy controls and working with daylighting systems. Next slide. So for the daylighting systems, something that we saw was that for schools, there was a trend in the 70s to cover up existing daylighting systems. That meant painting over clear skies, covering beautiful skylights. And this was typically done either because of perceived distraction or poor thermal performance and glare issues. Next slide. So for daylighting, the first thing we did was to look at harnessing any existing systems. That meant, uncovering skylights, removing paint from windows, and retrofitting those with, appropriate glare control with window films or shading devices. And then after you looked at the potential for existing systems, you thought about introducing tubular skylights or light shelf retrofits. The picture here is a combination of LED lighting and tubular skylighting. And you can see the installation is quite lovely, and it's pretty hard to tell the two apart. And if you look at the square ones, that is a flush-mounted tubular skylight, which is important to the number of schools. They need it to have the flush mount to stay within earthquake safety requirements. Next slide. Again, on daylighting, this is a light shelf retrofit. This is the same classroom. In both cases, the lights are off. And on the right-hand side, that's where a light shelf was introduced. And this allows you to have a more consistent luminance level across the classroom, and so you don't have those glare issues that you had in the original scenario. Next slide. When we were thinking about daylighting solutions, we had to, in general, just think about this as an entire package. So if we were thinking about roof penetration, we needed to understand first whether the roofs were due to be repaired or replaced, and whether penetrating the roof was a feasible option. If we went with tubular skylighting, that was great for daylighting, but it did mean that we were penetrating the roof and taking up some space. And if that meant that we didn't have enough space on the roof for our PV system, one option was to put that on canopy systems, either above play spaces or above parking lots. But sometimes those are more expensive. Next slide. HVAC, I think it's probably the most complicated of the ones just because there are so many options out there. But overall, our goal was increased efficiency, but also making sure that we were improving ventilation, thermal comfort, and noise control. For a lot of these, they might only be cost effective if you're at the end of the useful life. And the technology choices was really dependent on the existing system and whether the user was considering a fuel switch option. A lot of the schools wanted like-for-like replacements to avoid DSA reviews. And in some cases, we worked with manufacturers. There was one where the more efficient rooftop unit was heavier, and they were able to come up with a custom mounting to stay within weight restrictions. Next slide. For the technologies, as I mentioned before, if you're going electric, it's heat pumps, comes in any number of flavors. These can be sort of single classroom all the way up to rooftop package units. For the gas ones, we were typically looking at high efficiency condensing gas furnaces. And then, as mentioned in the other presentation, any number of systems to supplement that. We often sell motor and pump replacements, climate permitting economizers and evaporative condenser retrofits, and then also ceiling fans, which you can have the higher set points still have the same perceived level of comfort. Next slide. And along with these, looking at the controls, this is either a building management system or introducing smart thermostats, looking at temperature set point management, occupancy sensing, CO2 demand, control ventilation. And some of them, they were package unit interlocking so that they could sense if the teachers were opening the doors, the system would shut off to allow for natural ventilation. And for the temperature set point management, this is both in occupied and unoccupied spaces. We noticed that a lot of the server rooms had very low set points, and more modern technology can operate at higher temperatures. And so in this case, we were resetting the set points to be in line with current ASHRAE recommendations. Next slide. Portable classrooms, if you're not familiar, until 1998, the state had required 30% of classrooms to be portable if you were going to get funding. A lot of these are still in operation. They're aging. Schools aren't very excited about putting more money into them. And so if we had a retrofit, it had to be something really simple. And one of those options was replacing the HVAC BARD units. One of the consultants said, when the Newcastle BARD units were replaced with quiet, efficient new ones, those classrooms became the envy of the school. You couldn't even tell the units were running while the teachers were teaching, and the rooms were comfortable and properly ventilated. And in this case, we actually had 6 classrooms, and we were hoping to install 5 one summer and the 6th one the following summer so that we could have a clean data comparison. And we were met with a friendly but firm no that all of the teachers wanted them. So we didn't get our tidy data, but the teachers were all happy. So that was a win. Next slide. Next, looking at domestic hot water. In this case, it was really important to understand whether the current design load was still appropriate. A number of the schools said that systems were designed for 100% of the students to be taking showers every day, and that was no longer the norm. And in some cases, the use case of the building had changed and they didn't need domestic hot water. So we wanted to understand whether it could be downsized or removed. And then once we understood those loads, if you're electric, it's heat pumps, if you're gas, we were generally looking at tankless condensing gas water heaters. Next slide. Next category, envelope. One of the simple options is sealing and caulking. And here you have some potential for student and staff engagement. The picture on the right is from a student-teacher brigade at MIT's campus. And in this case, they would have a group of students and staff come in and actually learn how to do the caulking retrofit. They'd get it done in an afternoon, and the cost was just the materials and some pizza. We also were looking at exterior roof insulation, window films in conjunction with the daylighting design, and if windows were due to be replaced, low emissivity windows. Next slide. Lastly, miscellaneous electric loads, plug loads. This was generally schedule control, looking at Energy Star or better appliances, vending machine occupancy sensing, and for server rooms, high efficiency right size UPS. Next. So finally, I'll talk just a little bit about the cost and energy impact. Next slide. Starting on the energy side, the table at the top is the results of our site and source savings, the average, minimum, and maximum. And what we saw is that on average, from a site perspective, we were saving about 39%, 40% on source. Slightly lower than the percent savings that we're seeing in the study that I referenced earlier, but you'll notice that the baseline EUIs were also quite a bit lower, so we were starting with more efficient buildings. The graphics at the bottom, on the left-hand side, we have site energy broken down by end use. If you look at the yellow section, that's lighting. I think in almost all cases, lighting was our biggest source of savings, followed by HVAC, and that's the fans, cooling, and heating. On the right side, this is source energy use intensity broken down by gas and electricity, same building. And you'll see that in general, most of our savings were coming from electricity. And these are a specific building, but they're representative of pretty typical savings that we saw across the board. Next slide. For cost effectiveness, as I mentioned, this was a subset of the statewide program, which had savings to investment ratio limitations. They originally started at 1.05 and decreased that to 1.01. Our pilot did not have cost-effective constraints because we wanted to encourage the most aggressive measures. Next slide. For the schools that reported it, this meant that our simple paybacks range from 18 to 30 years, and the SIRs were 0.78 to 1.03, although that 1.03 was before DSA improvements. Next slide. This is my last slide. Just breaking these down into high categories. The free measures were, looking at schedule changes to existing systems, disconnecting your domestic hot water, sealing and caulking. Generally cost-effective fell into the interior and exterior lighting, plug load management. HVAC and appliances were maybe cost-effective if you were at the end of useful life, and then some of the daylighting options were expensive, but they had really enhanced non-energy benefits. Next slide. That's everything I have for today. Again, you can download the final report at that link. And if you have any questions after the talk, email me anytime. I love talking about this stuff. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. It's always nice to hear your voice. Our last presenter here is Michael Slater from Frontier Energy, who's going to be discussing this heat pump water pilot. They've been doing some incredible work with electrification in schools and specifically school kitchens. So Michael, I'm going to give you the mouse here, and then you're in charge. Go for it.
Great, thank you very much. Hi everybody, I'm Michael Slater. I'm an engineer with Frontier Energy. I'm gonna try and get my slides to advance on my own here. There we go. I wanted to talk about using heat pump water heaters in school kitchens. So a little bit about my background going to talk about the company I work for, Frontier Energy, previous work that we've completed, and currently what I'm looking for. So Frontier Energy operates the Food Service Technology Center, which used to be a PG&E run facility that basically put out all of the appliance testing standards for commercial kitchen equipment. And we get most of our funding through the California-owned IOUs, as well as the California Energy Commission. And generally we do two things. We do a bunch of lab work and we do a bunch of field work. And I'm one of the field engineers, so I'm interested in going out to sites, putting meters on stuff, replacing it with more efficient things, and documenting the savings. So I've been doing a lot of work with hot water systems recently, and we finished up a project in a full service restaurant pretty recently where we downsized a big recirculating system and replaced it with basically a more efficient total hot water system, as well as a more efficient water heater. So ultimately, we were looking at a full service restaurant that had about 20 fixtures on their hot water system and about 500 feet of total hot water piping that was costing them about $24,000 a year. And by doing a bunch of hot water load shifting, we managed to get managed to get that number down to about 18,000. And so a couple of the ways that we did that, one was by taking some of the largest hot water fixtures off of the hot water system, and we were able to downsize the total amount of hot water piping, and also replacing two tankless non-condensing gas water heaters with one condensing tank type water heater. So ultimately we managed to reduce our costs by about 25% here. So one of the things that we wanted to do with this project, one of the barriers to using a heat pump water heater in a food service setting is actually the dish machine itself. So dish machines are usually the largest load on a commercial kitchen on their hot water system, and generally it will outpace what a heat pump water heater can put out at any one time. And so you end up really driving a lot of electricity use because you're using your electric heating element in your heat pump water heater as opposed to your actual heat pump portion of that technology. And that's sort of what makes it not feasible for a lot of these sites. What we did at this restaurant was we pulled the dish machine off of the hot water system. We replaced it with an exhaust heat recovery dish machine that only takes cold water as its feed and provides all of its own heating. And through that we found a pretty we found a fairly cost-effective solution. Ultimately, I want to go and do that in some schools. So Carrie mentioned in her presentation that there were some domestic hot water projects that she was considering, and one of the things that one of the results that the most cost-effective solution was to either downsize your hot water system or to basically disconnect your hot water system. Which is a great option for a lot of schools that don't have commercial kitchens or cafeterias. So there are some schools in San Jose in particular that are running cafeterias or what I would consider to be facilities and need hot water for those operations. So what I want to do is come in, do a survey on the school's hot water system and figure out a way to put a heat pump water heater in a school in a cost-effective way. And the way I want to do that project-wise is I want to solicit the IOUs for some codes and standards support. Of the things that I learned in a recent project where I had to go and read Title 24 was that Title 24 basically considers heat pump water heaters to be a like residential technology. And so there's a need to do this research on other building types. So I want to take that and take it to the investor-owned utilities to solicit them for some funding. Ultimately, what I want to do is get everything that I would need, equipment, installation, funding-wise, so that we can perform a large retrofit at very little to no cost to the schools. And ultimately, we want to do this at enough sites, both on schools and in other food service facility types, to be able to funnel this information into the next Title 24 update, which will happen in 2022. Please, shoot me an email or give me a call. That's my cell on this slide. I know that we have some people from different school districts in San Jose on the line right now. If this sounds interesting to you, hit me up, and yeah, we'll be in touch. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Michael. That sounds awesome. I hope that several school districts on this webinar reach out to you. We'll definitely follow up on when we post this with all of the contact information of the people who presented today, so that it's easier to find their contact information. So I have heard that we have quite a few questions, but I really wanted to quickly dive into the kind of technical tools and resources to assist in getting to zero. This is actually like a little bit longer of a presentation than I'm going to give, so I'm going to kind of fly through this, but please feel free to refer back to it. But NBI has this Getting to Zero Resources Hub that has this curated list of resources for those interested in getting to zero. They include technical strategies, district approaches, state policies, national programs, case studies, etc. The Getting to Zero Hub has various ways to sort and find the information you're looking for, and it's really sorted into these 4 main categories: design and process, existing buildings, schools and districts, and state and national. So for example, if you click on design and process, this list of resources down here will populate, as well as these little filters that you can see on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side. So to use the filters on the left that you might want to click on, you might click on topics that you'd like to see. But just to note that if you do, like let's say you're in design and process here and you go into existing buildings, you will need to re-click on those filters. If you wanted to just browse the design and process section, for example, you'll find all these design and process related documents, documents such as the Zero Net Energy Project Guide, the Zero Energy Charrette Toolkit, and our Zero Energy School Stakeholder Messaging Guide. I'm actually not going to dive into this one. I'm going to go past it really quickly, but here's the Charrette Toolkit, the Stakeholder Messaging Guide, which actually you can use this matrix on the right, you can see on the right-hand side here, which helps you select your stakeholder. And then if you're trying to communicate something with them, like, zero energy buildings have lower operating costs, you can find that section in the matrix and then find a specific data point that corresponds to your audience that you're trying to communicate with. We also have the Communications Toolkit, which includes that Getting to Zero Processes Guide. It also has additional communication tools such as fact sheets and presentations to help you communicate your goal. This is where that Zero Energy Schools watch list lives. This is to raise public awareness about the districts and teams that are on the path. It lists schools that are either verified or emerging in Z&E and serves as this really effective tool to connect interested districts to those who are experiencing zero net energy. This is a great way to find someone to tell you a great story, like I mentioned earlier. So back out to the main hub, there's the existing buildings category that provides resources for school districts to assess, plan, and implement these existing facilities. I know that's been a big topic today. There's schools and district leadership on this path to zero. These are outstanding examples of schools and districts. And then there's these state and national examples that provide these exemplary programs with applicable context and examples. Additionally, on the hub, we have Zero Net Energy case studies. Also, another website is zeroenergy.org, which is from the Department of Energy through the Zero Energy Schools Accelerator Program, and they also host a wide array of zero energy school resources and case studies, including the Advanced Energy Design Guide from ASHRAE, which provides this prescriptive path and in-depth technical guidance to achieve zero net energy in school new construction. Just to note, this is new construction focused, but it's very applicable to retrofits, and it'll help you do things like set energy targets, modeling strategies for plug loads, lighting, building envelope, on-site renewable energy, and then of course tying it back to student outcomes. The accompanying guide to the AEDG is a Zero Energy Process Guide, and in 8 steps, it outlines how school stakeholders can be involved in the school design and construction process, just to make sure that these zero energy design goals are introduced early in the process and also maintained well after the school is operating. That document is a little bit more broader stakeholder focused, so it can be really useful to take on to your stakeholders when you're communicating and trying to sell zero energy effectively. The USGB Center for Green Schools also hosts this online learning lab with curriculum resources for sustainable schools. This is really cool. They recently launched something called the Building Learners Program, which ties all the school energy data to math and science activities. And this is also a big deal because this is free right now because of COVID-19. This is typically not free. You either have to be a teacher or you have to pay to access it. So I highly recommend you go in, you check it out. You can sort on subjects like engineering, career tech, or even music, art. And then you can sort by grade level and then theme, like energy, transportation, public spaces. You could do, you could sort by music and transportation and see what pops up. And again, this is free right now. I spent a lot of time in here. There's a lot of really great stuff in there. There's also just a multitude of other resources that might be useful for your path to zero. Some of these are listed here, and all of these can be found on our Getting to Zero hub, and we'll have these slides available after the webinar so you can refer back to this. So with that, I hear we have a ton of questions. I'm going to pass it off to Connie to read them. Thank you so much for hanging with us for 2 hours today. Connie, off to you, and I'm going to kind of leave all of you with this poem by a second grader about how great schools are as we answer questions.
Oh my goodness, that's super cute. I love it. So we are going to start out with a question. I think it's for Tina. We had someone ask, what campuses in the East Side school district there in San Jose are part of the Climate Smart pilot projects?
Yeah, so the 4 schools that I mentioned were, they're all high schools. The first is Piedmont Hills High School, then James Lick High School, Independence High School, which is the largest high school in Northern California, I believe, and lastly, Yerba Buena.
Great, thank you. We have actually a couple questions related to COVID-19. We are asking about the related, are there concerns around COVID-19 and ZNE, ZNC school design when speaking about airflow?
This is John at Integral Group. I take a shot at that.
Great.
We are predominantly recommending to our clients right now, and all of our new projects we're designing in this direction. We've got several new zero net carbon projects that we're in the middle of here, that just really started since all of this happened with COVID. We've done a great deal of research. We've taken all the recommendations from the agencies, appropriate agencies, especially ASHRAE, and developed a strategy that we think is appropriate. And as I was mentioning in my slide presentation there, one of the things that we're wanting to avoid is recirculation of air in spaces. And so this idea of DOAS, whether it's just for ventilation purposes, that would be good. But ideally, 100% fresh air for all of your cooling and heating needs year-round would be most ideal. This way, you're not recirculating any air, and if that air can be delivered in what we call a displacement ventilation configuration, what that means is the air is delivered typically low in the wall or from the floor. It can also be delivered from a ceiling, but what happens is you're delivering a larger quantity of air at a higher temperature for cooling, and the air pools at the floor and then surrounds the person's body and goes up to up out of the zone, the breathing zone, and so all the aerosols essentially would be removed or taken up out of the breathing zone. A typical air conditioning system doesn't work that way at all. It mixes the air in the room, so there's a lot more horizontal distribution of air across spaces that can take an aerosol from one person and move it over to another person. Our approach is one of trying to really control this air movement, and by using this kind of strategy. It's a much longer conversation than we can go into here, but I think it's important for everyone to sort of get a good recommendation and advice from professionals on this before you go into your next design project for a school, so we know we're getting the best design for post-COVID.
And this is Carrie, just to tack on, he mentioned following ASHRAE guidelines. They just launched an epidemic task force, and so they have some resources available to you for COVID-specific recommendations, especially on reopening.
Okay, we did have quite a few questions in response to all of the new construction in the case studies about retrofitting to zero net carbon. Can anybody speak a little bit more to that? Specifically technologies that can make a retrofit work in that regard?
So I'm working on a feasibility study right now, which the results aren't released, but we were looking at retrofitting existing school buildings. And this was sort of a first pass study, but we were looking at the measures of plug load and lighting retrofits, as well as fuel switching. And then also looking at some time of use measures so that you could respond and use energy at different times of day. And in that case, we saw pretty similar carbon savings to the energy savings. We, with just that subset, couldn't quite hit zero, but we're really close. And if you were to look at some more measures, you probably would hit it.
This is John. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, in terms of mechanical systems, there's not a good sort of single answer that I can give you. I don't think there are any limitations for fuel switching and going all electric in any existing building. There are obviously costs. Some in some buildings going to cost more than other buildings to do that retrofit, but because there's so many different HVAC systems in so many different schools, there's no way we could have a really productive conversation about how to do it in this forum, because there are just too many options. But that being said, I certainly feel like there are no real technology. There certainly isn't a technology limitation. It's just about coming up with creative strategies to either reuse part of what you have, or I think I heard in previous presentation, one of the previous presentations, ideally, in my mind, you could do a cost neutral retrofit if the equipment is at the end of its life. Then if you've got to replace it anyway, there are probably some clever ways of doing that in a cost neutral way to go from a gas to electric.
I just want to piggyback off of that domestic hot water has sort of a similar story where it really depends on what you have and you know, how far you're trying to go and how what your building's hot water load is, what your fixtures on your system are. But that's ultimately what I'm trying to show with the study that I just pitched, was that you can get to zero net carbon for at least your DHW system as a retrofit.
So Michael and John, so let's talk about what's got gas in it in a typical school. So hot water heater is gas. Heating often is gas. Kitchens have, if they have kitchens, have gas in them. I suppose if you want to get down to nitty gritty, you could say science classrooms have like gas Bunsen burners and things like that. Is there anything else that I missed?
I don't think so.
So those are the items that you would need to replace. So water heaters is fairly straightforward, I think.
Yeah, the complicated bit with water heaters is trying to be cost neutral. Going from a gas water heater to an electric water heater can get expensive fairly quickly.
Got it. Okay, and one of the things right now is currently the cost of natural gas has dropped significantly because of fracking, and if anything, recently it's dropped even further. So I think one of the tough things is comparing electricity versus gas right now. But one of the things I've heard is that over time, gas is likely to get more expensive just because as California moves toward more and more electric, the cost of maintaining the gas infrastructure relative to the amount of money it's bringing in is going to change in a way that makes it hard to maintain the gas infrastructure.
And also just to tack on that there are a lot of hot water heat pump programs launching this year, so it's quite possible that you'd be able to get some incentives to support a retrofit.
Great. Well, we are quite close to noon here, and I think some of the other questions that we have are maybe a little more time consumptive than what we have. So we will follow up. We will take those questions that we have not been able to answer, follow up with our presenters, and we will post them online with the link to this webinar recording, a link to the slides, and all of you will receive an email with those links shortly. I also wanted to remind everyone back to that video at the beginning from Silicon Valley Energy Watch to follow up with Tina if you would like a copy of that by mid-June. I think that's it from me. I don't know if you want to say goodbye or anything here, Tina, but thank you all so much for signing in. This has definitely been one of our biggest webinars to date. And thank you so much to all of our presenters.
Thanks for having us.
Yep, thanks for having us.
Bye all.
Thank you very much. Bye.